You're just basic. My husband laughed, clinking glasses with his coworkers at his promotion dinner. She was a maid before I married her. Now she organizes my calendar. I smiled, excused myself and left without a word. 2 hours later, his boss, his brother, and his phone wouldn't stop calling me. Just delete that text, I heard Brandon hiss into his phone as I rounded the corner into our kitchen. He fumbled the device, nearly dropping it into his morning coffee before noticing me. His expression shifted so quickly it was almost comical, from panic to that practice smile he wore at company functions. "Morning, babe. Just work stuff." I smiled back, my face a perfect mask as I handed him his freshly ironed shirt. "Your 9 a.m. with the Henderson account was moved to 10:30. I've updated your calendar." What I didn't tell him was that I'd also updated my own hidden calendar, marking another suspicious early morning text with a red flag, the 17th this month. 6 months ago I wouldn't have noticed. 6 months ago I was still the trusting wife who believed her husband when he said he was working late. Then came the text that changed everything. A message from Jennifer that popped up while Brandon was in the shower. "Last night was amazing. Can't wait until Katie's visiting her mom next weekend." That text was now preserved, screenshot and encrypted in what I called my insurance policy, a hidden folder buried deep in my cloud storage. The irony wasn't lost on me that Brandon had once laughed at my technologically challenged questions, patiently showing me how to use the very same backup systems I now use to document his betrayal. "You know what, honey?" Brandon said, adjusting his tie in the hallway mirror. "You're so good with all this organizing stuff. I don't know what I'd do without my calendar girl." He pecked me on the cheek, the scent of unfamiliar perfume barely detectable beneath his cologne. "Just doing what I do best," I replied, already mentally calculating when I could check the tracking software I'd installed on his phone during one of his deep post-affair slumbers. The same software had already logged 3 visits to the Westlake Hotel in the past month alone. My previous job as a maid at that very hotel had taught me more than how to fold fitted sheets. I'd learned to be invisible, to observe without being observed, to piece together stories from the evidence people carelessly left behind. The hotel manager still greeted me warmly when I, accidentally, ran into him while shopping. He had no idea that our casual conversations about hotel renovations gave me perfect cover to confirm which room had been booked under Brandon's corporate account on the nights he was working late. In our walk-in closet behind my neatly organized sweaters, sat an accordion file labeled Household Receipts. Brandon had never once opened it. Men like him never looked at mundane domestic details. If he had, he would have found meticulous records of his indiscretions. Gas receipts showing mileage inconsistent with his claimed destinations, dinner charges for 2 at restaurants he never mentioned visiting, a strand of long blonde hair, distinctly different from my brown, collected from his suit jacket and preserved in a small envelope. The company Christmas party 3 months ago had been particularly illuminating. While serving as the perfect hostess wife, refreshing drinks and engaging in pleasant small talk, I'd watched Brandon's face drain of color when Kyle's wife arrived with their youngest son Ethan. The boy couldn't have been more than 4, with familiar hazel eyes and a distinctive cleft in his chin, Brandon's cleft. I remembered counting backward, recalling Brandon's business trip to Chicago 5 years ago, how he'd returned distant and drinking more heavily than usual. How Jennifer had taken an extended leave from the company shortly afterward. The dates aligned perfectly. "You okay?" Brandon's brother Xavier had asked me that night, catching me staring at young Ethan. "Just tired," I'd replied, rearranging my features into the pleasant smile expected of an executive's wife. Xavier had given me a strange look, part pity, part guilt, before quickly excusing himself. Another data point for my collection. Xavier knew something. Making friends with Sarah, the lab technician at our local medical center, had been surprisingly easy. We'd met at a charity run sponsored by Brandon's company, and our weekly coffee dates had quickly become a highlight in my carefully constructed routine. She thought nothing of it when I mentioned my interest in genetic testing companies for a fictional article I was writing. "Most people don't realize how easy it is to run these tests," she'd explained over lattes. "You just need a good DNA sample. Hair with follicles attached works best." The next company family picnic had provided the perfect opportunity. Volunteering to help with the children's games had allowed me to offer water bottles to the overheated kids, including Ethan. His discarded bottle along with Brandon's electric razor clippings were now sealed and labeled in my growing collection of evidence. Sometimes I wondered if I should confront Brandon directly, throw the evidence in his face and watch his carefully constructed world crumble. But there was a certain power in knowledge unshared, in being underestimated. While Brandon and his colleagues laughed about his basic wife who had risen from maid to glorified secretary, I was building a case that would destroy not just his marriage but his career and reputation. Tonight was Brandon's promotion dinner. Tonight he would introduce me as his supportive wife, the woman behind his success. Little did he know that in my purse sat a USB drive containing every piece of evidence I'd collected over the past 6 months. A digital guillotine waiting to fall. As I applied my makeup, subtle, professional, forgettable, I rehearsed my pleasant smile in the mirror. The smile that had fooled Brandon for months. The smile that hid the calculating mind behind it. Ready to go, calendar girl? Brandon called from downstairs. Almost, I replied, voice steady despite the thunder of my heartbeat. Tonight I would maintain my role as the perfect wife one last time. Tomorrow the world would know exactly who Katie Lawson really was. And Brandon would learn too late that he had married not a basic girl, but a woman who knew how to clean up messes permanently. The restaurant's chandelier light caught in the crystal of my water glass as I sat perfectly poised beside Brandon at the head table. Le Chateau was the most expensive venue in the city. Brandon's choice, naturally. His hand rested possessively on my lower back as he introduced me to executives I'd already met at countless company functions. I smiled and nodded, playing my part flawlessly. "This is my wife, Katie," he said to the CFO's new girlfriend, a willowy blonde who assessed my conservative navy dress with a quick up-down glance. "She keeps the home fires burning while I'm conquering the business world." The woman laughed politely while I maintained my pleasant expression, mentally adding this interaction to my growing list of subtle humiliations. Brandon had long ago stopped seeing me as a partner and started viewing me as an accessory, like his Rolex or his Italian leather briefcase. Kyle, Brandon's boss, stood to offer a toast once everyone was seated. I watched him carefully, noting how his eyes never quite met mine. Did he know his wife and Brandon were involved? Or was he as oblivious as Brandon believed me to be? To Brandon Lawson, Kyle raised his glass. "The newest senior vice president of operations. Your dedication to this company has been nothing short of remarkable." I raised my glass along with everyone else, but my mind was 3 months back at the company picnic watching 4-year-old Ethan running through the sprinklers. Brandon had strategically positioned himself at the grill station all afternoon, creating a bubble of smoke and activity that justified his staying far from the children's play area. I'd calculated the dates in my planner that very night. Brandon's Chicago trip, Jennifer's subsequent leave of absence. Everything aligned perfectly with Ethan's age. "And of course," Kyle continued, "behind every successful man is a supportive woman. To Katie for being Brandon's rock, doormat, calendar girl." I'd heard it all. I sipped my champagne, letting the bitter bubbles match my mood. When dinner arrived, Brandon was already 2 drinks in and growing louder with each toast in his honor. The sales director asked how we'd met and Brandon launched into his favorite anecdote. "She was actually a maid at the Westlake," he said, gesturing toward me with his fork. "Can you believe it? Cleaning rooms by day, taking night classes. I checked in during that Milwaukee account crisis. Remember that disaster, Kyle? And she brought extra towels to my room." He winked at his colleagues. "She was cute and I was stressed." I remembered that night differently. I remembered a kind-eyed man who had seemed genuinely interested in my literature studies, who had asked thoughtful questions and treated me with respect. Where had that man gone? "Now she manages my entire life," Brandon continued, the alcohol loosening his filter. "Appointments, social calendar, even reminds me when it's my mother's birthday." The table laughed appreciatively. "Quite the Cinderella story," Jennifer commented, her smile not reaching her eyes. "More like My Fair Lady," Brandon retorted, getting more laughs. "Had to polish her up a bit, but she cleans up nice, doesn't she?" I felt something hardening inside me like concrete setting. 6 years of marriage, of supporting his dreams while quietly pursuing my organizational psychology degree online, of maintaining his home and reputation while he climbed the corporate ladder. All reduced to a punchline. "You're just basic," Brandon laughed, clinking glasses with his coworkers. "She was a maid before I married her. Now she organizes my calendar. The table erupted in laughter. I glanced up and caught Xavier's eye from across the table. Brandon's brother looked uncomfortable, his gaze dropping to his plate when our eyes met. He knew, had always known, and had said nothing. "Excuse me," I said quietly, placing my napkin beside my barely touched salmon. "I need to freshen up." The cool air of the hallway was a relief after the suffocating atmosphere of the dining room. I leaned against the wall, allowing myself 5 seconds of closed eyes and deep breathing before straightening my spine and heading toward the ladies' room. "Katie, wait." Xavier stood awkwardly by the coat check, his hands thrust into his pockets. We'd always gotten along well, better than he and Brandon did, truthfully. "I'm fine, Xavier," I said, voice steady. "Just needed some air." "He shouldn't talk about you like that." Xavier stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You deserve better. You've always deserved better." I tilted my head, studying him. "What exactly are you trying to say?" His expression flickered, guilt, concern, and something else. He opened his mouth, closed it, then finally said, "I've wanted to tell you for so long. About Brandon and Jennifer." I finished for him. The shock on his face would have been comical under different circumstances. "How did you?" "I'm not as basic as your brother thinks," I replied, reaching into my purse for my compact mirror. I checked my lipstick calmly, watching Xavier's reflection as he processed what I'd said. "What are you going to do?" he asked finally. I snapped the compact shut. "Nothing that isn't long overdue." Xavier seemed about to say more but stopped when he saw my expression. Whatever he read there made him step back slightly. "You should return to the party," I suggested. "People will wonder where you've gone." After he reluctantly walked away, I entered the restroom and locked myself in a stall. From my purse, I removed my phone and a small notebook marked "Personal Calendar." Inside were dates, times, and codes only I understood. Today's date was circled in red, not for Brandon's promotion, but for what I'd discovered this morning while organizing his tax receipts for our accountant. Hotel bills from the Westlake charged to his personal card rather than the company account. 3 nights last month when he was supposedly at a conference in Denver. The receipt showed room service for 2 champagne and a spa package. The final confirmation had come just hours before we left for tonight's dinner. A bank statement showing regular transfers to an account I didn't recognize. An account opened around the time Ethan was born. I pulled out my phone and opened the pre-drafted email I'd prepared weeks ago. Attached were photos, bank statements, hotel receipts, and the DNA test results confirming Brandon's paternity of Kyle's youngest son. My finger hovered over the send button. Once I pressed it, there would be no going back. Brandon's carefully constructed life would implode, and mine would change forever. I thought of his words, "just basic," and his laughter mingling with his colleagues. 6 years of my life reduced to a joke. I pressed send, watched the email disappear into cyberspace, then calmly fixed my makeup. I had approximately 90 minutes before the cascade of consequences would begin. Just enough time to leave the restaurant, access my separate bank account, and disappear before Brandon's world collapsed. I smiled at my reflection, a real smile this time. Not basic after all. I walked out of Le Chateau with measured steps, nodding politely to the maitre d' who held the door. "Mrs. Lawson, shall I tell your husband you've stepped out for some air?" "No need," I replied. "I'll be back shortly." That was the first lie I'd told all evening. As I slid into the driver's seat of my modest Honda, the practical car Brandon had insisted was more than enough for a wife who only drove to grocery stores and nail salons, I felt an unexpected surge of adrenaline. The night air felt electric against my skin as I pulled away from the valet station. In my rearview mirror, the golden lights of the restaurant grew smaller, like stars disappearing at dawn. I'd memorized this route over the past month, mentally rehearsing each turn and stoplight until I could drive it in my sleep. 20 minutes later, I pulled into the storage facility on the edge of town. The place was deliberately unremarkable, the kind of business people drove past without noticing. I'd chosen it specifically for its anonymity, paying 6 months in advance with cash under my maiden name. The security guard nodded as I swiped my access card. "Evening, Ms. Reynolds." "Evening, Chuck," I replied, using the friendly but forgettable tone I'd perfected as Brandon's wife. Another skill he'd never appreciated. Unit 247 looked like all the others. A metal door with a simple combination lock. Inside was an ordinary-looking cardboard box labeled college textbooks. Brandon had never questioned why I kept my old organizational psychology textbooks. He'd never asked about my studies at all, really. Inside the box, beneath a layer of actual textbooks, sat my insurance policy. A laptop I'd purchased with cash at a pawn shop, never connected to our home network, and a waterproof case containing thumb drives with multiple backups of all my evidence. I powered up the laptop and connected to the mobile hotspot I'd activated under yet another name. Digital footprints were easy to track if you weren't careful, and I'd been extraordinarily careful. Though I'd already sent the initial email from the restaurant, there were still contingency plans to activate. I logged into the secure email account I'd created months ago, specifically for tonight. In the drafts folder waited 3 additional emails, each scheduled to deploy if certain conditions were met. The first contained the video footage. Brandon had always been paranoid about security, installing an elaborate camera system throughout our home after a neighbor's break-in 3 years ago. What he didn't know was that I'd repositioned 2 of those cameras last year, angling them to capture our living room couch and the entrance to our guest bedroom, Jennifer's favorite locations when she visited during my errands. I clicked on one video file just to confirm it was the right one. The timestamp showed 3 weeks ago while I was supposedly at my book club. There was Brandon leading Jennifer through our front door, his hand already sliding up her blouse. I closed the file quickly, a wave of nausea washing over me despite my mental preparation. The second contingency email contained financial records, proof of the separate account Brandon had set up, regular payments that aligned perfectly with Ethan's birthday, and expenses for gifts I'd never received. A teddy bear purchased the day Ethan was born. A child-sized baseball glove charged to our joint credit card but never brought home. The third contained the DNA results. That had been the trickiest part of my plan, requiring precise timing and a steady nerve. Sarah, my lab technician friend, had unwittingly helped by explaining exactly how genetic testing worked. The science wasn't complicated, it was the collection that required finesse. I'd volunteered to help at the company's annual family picnic 3 months ago, organizing games for the children. No one questioned why the executive's supportive wife would want to hand out water bottles to sweaty kids. No one noticed me carefully collecting Ethan's discarded bottle, preserving the DNA that would ultimately expose his true parentage. I scheduled all 3 emails to send automatically, staggered 30 minutes apart, beginning an hour into Kyle's speech. The timing was crucial. I wanted the revelations to unfold gradually, giving each bombshell time to detonate fully before the next one dropped. With the electronic portion of my plan initialized, I removed one last item from the storage box. A manila envelope containing hard copies of everything. This would go to Brandon's parents tomorrow via courier. They deserved to know what kind of son they'd raised, what kind of brother Xavier had protected. I powered down the laptop and returned everything to its hiding place. The weight I'd carried for 6 months, the suspicion, the evidence gathering, the careful planning, began to lift from my shoulders. Whatever happened next, I had reclaimed my agency. Back in the car, I checked the time. 1 hour had passed since I'd left the restaurant. By now, Brandon would be wondering where I was, perhaps slightly annoyed that I wasn't there to laugh appreciatively at his jokes, to be introduced to important clients as his pretty, basic wife. I drove to a small coffee shop across town. Not one of our usual places, but a quiet spot I discovered during my reconnaissance missions. The barista smiled as I ordered a simple tea. "Rough night?" she asked, noting my formal attire. "Transformative," I replied, selecting a table by the window where I could watch the sunset paint the sky in shades of fire. I turned off my phone completely, removing the battery for good measure. In the sudden silence, I felt my heartbeat slow to a steady rhythm. No more alerts, no more careful monitoring of Brandon's movements, no more pretending. The tea was hot and soothing against my throat as I watched darkness creep across the city. In exactly 43 minutes, the first email would reach the entire executive board, Kyle, key clients, and Brandon's family members. The video footage would follow 30 minutes later, and finally the DNA results. A strange sense of peace settled over me, unexpected after months of quiet rage. I had done everything in my power to ensure Brandon faced consequences for his actions. Now the universe would take over, each revelation triggering its own cascade of effects that would ultimately dismantle the life he'd built on lies. The coffee shop played soft jazz, the kind Brandon had always dismissed as pretentious background noise. I closed my eyes briefly, letting the melody wash over me. When had I last done something simply because I enjoyed it, not because it fit the image of Brandon's perfect wife? Outside, streetlights flickered on as night descended fully. In another life, the life I'd thought I was building, I would be at Brandon's side right now, smiling proudly as he accepted congratulations for his promotion. In that life, I was still the grateful former maid who had married up, forever indebted to the man who had rescued me. But in this life, my real life, I was the architect of justice. The basic wife who had methodically documented every betrayal. The invisible woman who had finally made herself seen. The clock on the wall ticked steadily toward 9 o'clock. The storm was coming. And for the first time in years, I was exactly where I wanted to be. Away from the destruction, watching from a distance as my carefully laid plans unfolded with the precision of a perfectly kept calendar. 9 o'clock arrived with the soft chime of the coffee shop's antique clock. I imagined the scene unfolding at Le Chateau. Kyle raising his glass for a final toast to Brandon's brilliant future. Executives nodding appreciatively, Brandon basking in his moment of triumph. Then the synchronized ping of email notifications disrupting the polished atmosphere. I didn't need to witness it to know exactly how it would play out. Kyle, ever the professional, would likely check his phone discreetly beneath the table. A habit I'd observed at dozens of company functions. The subject line alone would be enough. Urgent. The truth about Brandon Lawson and your son. At that exact moment in Le Chateau's private dining room, Kyle Harrington's speech faltered mid-sentence. His eyes, fixed on his phone screen beneath the tablecloth, widened perceptibly. The crystal champagne flute in his left hand trembled slightly, sending ripples across the golden liquid. And so with great pleasure I officially welcome Brandon to the... Kyle's voice died as he scrolled through the message, color draining from his face like water down a drain. The assembled guests shifted uncomfortably in the sudden silence. Brandon leaned forward, his practiced smile now strained at the edges. Kyle, he prompted. Everything okay? Kyle looked up slowly, his gaze moving from Brandon to Jennifer, who sat 3 seats away. The look that passed between boss and wife contained volumes. Confusion, dawning comprehension, and finally, devastating certainty. Where's Katie? Kyle asked, his voice unnaturally calm. Brandon glanced at the empty chair beside him, irritation flashing across his features. Powdering her nose, I guess. You know women at these things. His laugh died when no one joined in. Jennifer's phone chimed next, followed by a cascade of notification sounds around the table as the email reached each board member simultaneously. She fumbled with her clutch, nearly knocking over her water glass. When she saw the subject line, she made a small, wounded sound in the back of her throat. What the hell is going on? Brandon demanded, looking around the table as his colleagues averted their eyes, some already reading the damning email. Xavier stood abruptly, chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. I need to make a call, he muttered, already dialing Katie's number as he stumbled toward the exit. Across town, in their tastefully decorated Tudor home, Jennifer's nanny Marissa was settling the children for bed when the house phone rang shrilly. Harrington Residence, she answered. Marissa, listen carefully. Jennifer's voice was tight with barely controlled panic. I need you to pack bags for me and the children. Enough for a week. Use the emergency suitcases in my closet. Mrs. Harrington, is everything all right? Marissa asked, alarmed by the unusual request so late in the evening. Just do it, Jennifer snapped. And have the children ready to leave in 30 minutes. All except. There was a painful pause. All except Ethan. He'll be staying with his father tonight. Marissa's gaze drifted to the hallway where 4-year-old Ethan was brushing his teeth, blissfully unaware that his world was shattering around him. Meanwhile, at the Golden Palm restaurant across town, Eleanor and Richard Lawson were celebrating their 40th wedding anniversary when both their phones lit up simultaneously. No work calls on our special night, Eleanor chided her husband as he reached for his device. The boys promised they wouldn't disturb us unless it was an emergency. Richard's face grew increasingly grave as he read the email. Ellie, he said softly, you need to see this. Eleanor's hand flew to her mouth as she scrolled through the evidence of her son's betrayal. That poor child, she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. And Katie, All this time. Richard's hands clenched into fists. Xavier knew, he said, pointing to a text exchange included in the evidence. He's known for years and said nothing. Protected his brother while that poor girl suffered in silence. Eleanor's shoulders slumped as the weight of the revelation crashed down upon her. We raced them better than this, Richard. What happened to our boys? Richard signaled for the check, their celebration forgotten. I don't know who those men are, Ellie. But they're not the sons we thought we raised. Back at Le Chateau, chaos had fully erupted. Brandon, finally grasping the magnitude of what was happening, longed for Kyle's phone. This is a mistake, he insisted, voice rising as heads turned from nearby tables. Some kind of sick joke. Katie would never. Your wife, Kyle said with deadly calm, has provided video evidence of you and my wife in our home. My home, Lawson. Where my children sleep. Jennifer had retreated to a corner, speaking rapidly into her phone, her free hand gesturing frantically as she issued instructions to the nanny. Board member Diane Thompson was already making calls of her own. We need to convene an emergency meeting. Tonight. This impacts the Henderson merger. They've been copied on the email. Her practiced crisis management tone couldn't fully mask her shock. We need a statement prepared before the morning news cycle. The restaurant manager hovered anxiously at the periphery, sensing the imploding celebration but unsure how to intervene. Brandon's phone buzzed incessantly. Colleagues who had left early, friends who had been copied on the email, his parents trying desperately to reach him. Each vibration represented another pillar of his life crumbling. She can't do this to me, he muttered, repeatedly calling Katie's number only to be sent straight to voicemail. She's nothing without me. Nothing. Xavier returned ashen-faced to find Brandon wild-eyed and desperate. She's not answering, Xavier said. I've tried calling her 10 times. You knew, Brandon accused, rounding on his brother. You knew about Jennifer and said nothing. Like you would have listened, Xavier retorted, years of resentment bubbling to the surface. You never listened to anyone, Brandon. That's why Katie left. You never saw her, never heard her. She was just furniture to you. Convenient, useful furniture. Kyle, who had been reading through the second email, the one containing financial records, looked up with renewed horror. You've been paying child support, he said, voice hollow. For my son. My son. The last words emerged as a broken whisper. Jennifer moved toward him, reaching out a placating hand. Kyle, please, we need to discuss this privately. Don't touch me, Kyle hissed, recoiling from her. Don't ever touch me again. Outside, media vans were already arriving, tipped off by someone inside about the unfolding drama. Flashbulbs illuminated the restaurant's elegant facade, capturing board members as they hurried to their cars, faces grim. By midnight, #Lawson scandal was trending on social media. Anonymous sources from within the company leaked snippets of the story, each version more sensational than the last. The company's stock price began to fluctuate in Asian markets, the first ripples of financial fallout. In the eye of this storm, Brandon stood alone in the now empty private dining room, staring at his phone as it displayed the final email. The DNA results confirming Ethan's paternity, sent to every significant person in his professional and personal life. The evidence was irrefutable. The consequences inescapable. His perfectly constructed life had been balanced on a foundation of lies. Lies he had convinced himself were harmless, necessary even. Now that foundation had been pulled away in one masterful stroke by the woman he had fatally underestimated. The basic wife. The maid. The calendar girl. The architect of his destruction. 3 days passed like a fever dream. I stayed in a quiet hotel on the outskirts of the city, watching the scandal unfold through news alerts and social media. Brandon's name was everywhere. The rising executive caught in a web of lies, the paternity scandal rocking the corporate world, the company's stock tumbling in response. I turned on my phone only once briefly to confirm what I already knew. 67 missed calls from Brandon, 23 from Xavier, and countless text messages ranging from desperate pleas to vicious accusations. I didn't read them. Instead, I forwarded the relevant financial documents to my lawyer, ensuring my separation from Brandon would be as clean as possible. On the third morning, I checked out of the hotel and drove home, unsure what awaited me. The driveway was empty, Brandon's Mercedes conspicuously absent. The house stood quiet and untouched, like a museum dedicated to a life I no longer recognized as mine. Inside, I breathed in the lingering scent of Brandon's cologne, fainter now but still present. Evidence of his hasty departure was everywhere. Drawers left partially open, his favorite watch missing from the dresser, the decanter of bourbon empty on the bar cart. I moved through each room like a ghost, disconnected from the carefully curated furnishings that had once represented our shared success. In the bedroom closet, his clothes still hung in perfect order, color-coded, organized by season and occasion just as I had arranged them. The expensive suits that had helped transform him from ambitious junior executive to senior VP remained, though some were missing. I ran my fingers along the fine fabrics, remembering how proud I'd been to support his rise, how I'd steamed and brushed these very garments before important meetings. The doorbell rang, startling me from my reverie. I approached cautiously, peering through the peephole to find Kyle Harrington standing on my porch. Not Brandon's boss anymore. Not since the board's emergency meeting had resulted in Brandon's immediate termination, but still an imposing figure in his tailored suit and grave expression. "Katie," he said when I opened the door, his voice softer than I'd ever heard it. "May I come in?" I led him to the living room, the same room where his wife and my husband had betrayed us both. If Kyle made the connection, he gave no sign, sitting stiffly on the edge of the sofa. "I won't pretend to understand everything that happened," he began, "or why you chose to expose it the way you did. But I respect your courage." I remained silent, waiting. Men like Kyle didn't make personal house calls without purpose. "The company is in turmoil," he continued. "Brandon's actions have damaged our reputation, threatened client relationships, and disrupted operations. We need someone who can restore order." He leaned forward. "Someone with exceptional organizational skills, integrity, and intimate knowledge of our systems." I almost laughed. "You're offering me a job?" "Executive assistant to the new CEO," Kyle clarified. "With a path to operations management within a year if you're interested." "Why would you trust me after what I did?" Kyle's expression hardened momentarily. "Because you told the truth regardless of the cost. That's rare, Katie. And because I've seen your work. The systems you implemented for Brandon, the efficiencies you created." He took credit, but it was you, wasn't it? I nodded slowly. "Besides," Kyle added with a grimace that almost resembled a smile, "I think we both deserve a fresh start." After he left, I stood in the middle of the house that had never truly felt like mine, considering his offer. There was a certain poetic justice in taking a position at the very company where Brandon had risen and fallen. The next visitor arrived as evening shadows stretched across the lawn. Xavier looked terrible, unshaven, eyes bloodshot, shoulders slumped beneath the weight of collective guilt. "Mom and Dad sent me," he said, holding out an envelope. "They wanted you to have this." The letter inside was handwritten on Eleanor's cream stationery, her elegant script flowing across the page with warmth and regret. They expressed their heartbreak over Brandon's actions, their shame at Xavier's complicity, and their admiration for my strength. They hoped, Eleanor wrote, that I might consider maintaining a relationship with them despite everything. They had always wanted a daughter, and in their eyes I would always be family. I folded the letter carefully. "Thank you for bringing this." Xavier stared at his hands. "I should have told you years ago. He's my brother." "And I was your sister-in-law," I replied, not unkindly. "Family loyalty is complicated, Xavier. I understand that better than most." After he left, I spent the evening sorting through Brandon's possessions, separating what he'd want to keep from what could be discarded. The suits, I decided, deserved better than storage or donation to some faceless charity. The next morning, I loaded them into my car and drove to New Beginnings, a program helping former inmates transition back into the workforce. The director's eyes widened at the sight of 15 designer suits, each worth thousands. "These will help men make the right impression at interviews," she explained, running her hand over a charcoal Tom Ford. "First impressions matter so much when you're trying to rebuild your life." "I know," I said, remembering Brandon's critical gaze the first time he saw me out of my maid's uniform. "Sometimes the right armor makes all the difference." 6 months later, I sat behind my executive desk on the 32nd floor, reviewing quarterly projections. The company had weathered the scandal, emerging stronger under new leadership. My promotion to operations director had come 3 months ahead of schedule, My reorganization of key systems saving the company millions in the aftermath of Brandon's departure. My assistant knocked lightly before entering. Delivery for you, Ms. Reynolds. Inside the envelope was a single sheet of paper. Brandon's distinctive handwriting immediately recognizable. I had heard through mutual connections that he'd moved to Chicago, accepting a lower-level position at a smaller firm, his reputation permanently tarnished by the scandal. Katie, the letter began. I've written this letter 100 times in my head. Nothing seems adequate. I was wrong, about you, about us, about everything that mattered. I didn't see you because I couldn't see past myself. You were never basic. You were extraordinary and I was too blind to recognize it. I'm sorry. I folded the letter methodically, creasing it with my fingernail before placing it in a folder labeled Closed Accounts in my bottom drawer. No anger, no satisfaction, no regret, just the quiet acknowledgement that this chapter of my life was complete. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my office, I could see the city stretching toward the horizon, the same view Brandon had coveted for years. But unlike him, I didn't measure my worth by the height of my office or the prestige of my title. My worth had always been there, hidden in plain sight behind the perfect mask he'd labeled basic. And now, rising from the ashes of his betrayal, I was finally, completely, unapologetically myself. The calendar on my desk showed a full schedule. Meetings with department heads, lunch with Kyle's wife, his now ex-wife Jennifer had moved abroad, and drinks later with Eleanor and Richard Lawson, who had become unexpected friends and allies in the aftermath. I was no longer anyone's calendar girl. I was the architect of my own destiny. And there was nothing basic about that. If this story of sweet revenge had you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when Katie sent that perfectly timed email during Kyle's speech, watching Brandon's empire of lies collapse from a peaceful coffee shop across town. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Was it the basic wife comment that broke Katie's silence? The DNA test reveal? Or maybe when she donated Brandon's suits to help others rebuild their lives? Don't miss more thrilling stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload. And remember, sometimes the calendar girl is keeping track of more than just your appointments.